Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the second part of our ATARC Insider Risk webinar, focused on the use of artificial intelligence in insider risk programs. We had such a great event back on January the 9th. We decided to come back for our second round to discuss this topic further. In today's webinar, we're going to continue our conversation about the use of AI in support of insider risk programs in government, industry, and academia. Our panelists will discuss culture and messaging and obtaining buy-in on the use of AI from senior leaders. Our panelists will also discuss how to tackle misconceptions, myths, and stigmas around the use of AI and how to use AI to find threats. As a reminder, today's webinar will be recorded and we'll also be conducting a Q&A at the end of the session, so please feel free to type in any questions that you may have into the chat as we go along. My name is John Massey. I'm the Director of the Department of the Air Force Counter Insider Threat Hub, and I will serve as the moderator for today's event. I am fortunate to be joined today by two special guests returning with us from our January webinar, who will serve as panelists for our discussion. I'd now like to introduce our panelists, Dr. Frank Peril, analyst with the United States Senate Sergeant at Arms Office Cybersecurity Department, and Mr. Danny Livers, Insider Threat Program Senior Official, Georgia Institute of Technology. Gentlemen, welcome back, and thank you again for participating in today's discussion.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
For our first question to kind of get us going and started today, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to respond, since I'm sure you have a lot of topics on this particular topic. First question is, why is culture so important when it comes to using AI in insider risk programs? And Frank, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks for that question, John. So the first thing I'd like to say about culture in relation to anything, if you want something completely to the side that might help you start thinking about the relevance of culture, two opportunities that I can point out for you are the accident reports for the Challenger, the shuttle disasters, Challenger and Columbia. In both of those reports, culture is mentioned specifically as one of the primary causal issues behind both of those disasters. So if you want to take a sideways look at this, if you want to get out of the weeds of security, insider threat, and AI, and their relationship to culture, take a look at those two reports. That's the first thing I'd want to say. On specifically this topic, the first thing that comes to my mind about the intersection of culture and insider risk programs and AI is the idea of speed. Organizations, especially security organizations, often have a real concern with things like objectivity, speed, efficiency, effectiveness. And a lot of times, especially in American culture, we associate those kinds of characteristics with technology and machines and not with people. And so one of the things to be on the lookout for is whether or not your organization is actually looking at taking the time, devoting the people to a balanced view of what AI can do and can't do. Talking about things like second and third order effects of using AI, especially for insider risk programs, any kind of security effort. A lot of times we're told in organizations that we got to get it done faster with fewer, work smarter, not harder, those kinds of things. But in this kind of case, when you have such a game-changing technology as this, I think it's worth it for leaders to start to fight for that time and make some space to talk about how the culture of the organization may be enhancing or detracting from the ability to understand the relevance and the use of AI. That's one kind of answer I have. The second kind is larger American culture and AI. And what I mean by that is, let's say for the sake of argument, I've detected that in larger American culture, there are a lot of folks who seem to have taken it on as either a style or way of life to sort of be outraged at whatever. And so this culture of outrage, and I'm being intentionally provocative here for all of our guests, this culture of outrage and this culture of emotion first and thinking second is exactly the kind of thing you want to think about when you're doing things like training and thinking about training your analysts in your insider threat organizations, right? Because like any American, they might be susceptible to that style or that way of life. And so you want to think about whether or not that might be impacting their ability either to use AI or be susceptible to things like deep fakes or misinformation. So those are my answers. Thanks, John.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And your reference to selective outrage, I think about AI being in the news lately a lot. There's been just about every day there's an article on AI in mainstream media about concerns and need for international coalitions and agreements and parameters and things like that. So, we're just talking about it today in this little specific mission space known as insider risk. So it definitely, those concerns, those issues when it comes to culture goes much broader beyond just the programs that we work in. So appreciate your insights there. Danny, do you have any thoughts on this question specifically related to the importance of culture and insider risk programs?
Well, yeah, I couldn't agree with Frank any more than what he just said. The only thing that I would add to it is that the way of the future is through technology and through artificial intelligence and machine learning aspects. And inside the insider risk world, how we consume those resources and how we can address them with our workforce and show the importance of them, that's what's going to help us build our maturity and our enhancements for our programs that are out there. So I do think that the importance is that we set that stage right up front. Now that it's right here in front of us, like Frank said, it's in the news, it's everywhere we go. No matter what it is, you go on LinkedIn and you can find links to where you can take a selfie and turn it into a professional, photo using AI, and there's a whole list that the AI community puts out for links to go out and to do weird things with artificial intelligence, to where I could take a look at those things and say, well, somebody can use those to impersonate or to, attract some of my workforce for exploitation. And so I think that sharing that information and setting the stage that where we are today with it and where it has the capabilities of going is very important for our workforce, so that they just understand where we're coming from a practitioner standpoint, and running our insider risk management programs.
Thank you, Danny. Really good thoughts there. I think about artificial intelligence like many technologies that came before it, or many capabilities. I'm sure when credit cards first emerged, people were like, what is this? And there was apprehension and resistance and concern about that, and self-checkouts and autonomous vehicles and things of that nature. So again, it's not unique, it's not foreign to this particular technology or this particular capability, but it is very visible in the news. We hear a lot about it, a lot of people talking about it, because of the potential consequences of it if it goes unchecked. So I think great input from both of you there with respect to the culture and the importance of that in your program. Now, my next question, and this is targeted to you, Frank, how do we help shape the messaging to the general workforce? So we're talking about a positive culture. I think part of that culture includes that messaging and the communications piece to the workforce, to include those non-technical people. I consider myself a non-technical person. I tell my team all the time, dumb it down for me, make it John-proof, because then I'll be able to understand it. So how do we make it John-proof about the dual nature of AI, such as the promise that it offers, but also the potential dangers that we may encounter with its use? So really, how do you message AI in the workforce?
Yeah, sure. This is going to obviously vary by the nature, the type of the organization you're in. But you know what? Let me stop a second, because it's something I forgot to say before. Whatever I'm saying today, these are all my personal opinions. I don't represent the Senate, and I apologize to the audience. I should have said that up from the set that up front. Anyway, back to your question. There's a kind of sort of presentation that I've seen in a couple of different organizations, in which one on a topic of particular thorniness or uncertainty, leadership can remain silent and just let things play out. Don't recommend that one. Another approach that I've seen is that leadership becomes sort of cheerleaders for a particular point of view. And I think in this particular situation, as Danny was pointing out before, the AI genie is out of the bottle. It's not going back in. That said, that shouldn't shut down all of our critical faculties. And it shouldn't, I think, shut down the availability of an opportunity for leaders in lots of organizations to actually take the bull by the horns and say, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we're working on. Of course, with due regard for operational security. Here's how we're going to try to use this. Here's how we are using it, because in a lot of cases, we already are. And that kind of messaging about where we stand and where we don't stand, I found to be a lot more engaging and unifying for organizational cultures rather than the others. The others tend to create an us and them and an air of sort of suspicion. Is anybody in charge of this? Is anybody looking at this? And, then after that, if you choose to do sort of a realistic, transparent approach in your organization, it's a matter of using, good analogies and good examples to help people understand and to let them know that this is not a one and done. This is going to be iterated over and over and over again in terms of what AI is, what it's capable of, what its limits are, how it's going to be used in any particular context or on any particular issue. That may sound like a mundane answer, but that's the best I got right now, given what we know and don't know.
No, and I think that's great guidance and insight there. What I take away from that is transparency is king. The transparency that leadership conveys to not just, again, those technical experts or the subject matter experts that are working within your program, but the broader workforce, the broader population. Really, really important, really, really critical, because you're letting people know up front that it's a capability you're exploring. This is how you're using, this is how you're not using it, and so on and so forth. So having that truth in advertising, so to speak, is very important. Now, to kind of piggyback and shift over to Danny, how do you get that buy-in and that unified messaging from senior leadership when you're using AI in the program?
Well, that's a tough one. It's just like anything else that these days, you kind of got to beg, borrow, and steal, in order to get money or to afford some of these technological solutions out there. But one of the big things is just the embracement of it itself. I think that, being upfront and honest about not only its capabilities, but its limiting factors. When you're going and you're talking to senior leadership, it's a sales pitch every time for us. We're asking somebody to, our CIO's office to purchase, technological solutions for us. My budget is not set up that way. So when it comes down to that, they're expecting that market pitch. And I've learned that when you can throw in something and get them off balance, and I hope that there's no procurement people out there listening, because we're probably letting the cat out of the bag here. But if you show them both sides of the fence, leadership tends to sit back for a second and they don't become a no. I don't know how many organizations out there today are, encountering, the inflation of things and the budget constraints, especially within the government, and the potentials for shutdowns and the tightening of funds and all of those things. So a lot of people, I think, know where we're coming from, that it is, you have to sell this out in a way. And when you go towards and you're just telling everybody all the great things that it does, like, oh, it's going to give us this, it's going to give us this, we're going to be able to produce this many more alerts, and we're going to be able to process this much more information and this much more data and all this. But then what we don't think about is the facts of, what's the white noise, what's the false positives, what's the potential for more workload. And so if we can go ahead and present those as limiting factors, and we can be upfront and honest about what the boundaries are of artificial intelligence, if you're looking to purchase or to utilize artificial intelligence in your organization, you've probably done your research on which one that you prefer. You three vendors, you're getting quotes from three different people. You kind of know what the capabilities are and all that, but you also know what they can't do for you. And I think that that's very, very important when we're talking about AI, because, you know, AI is a great thing. I love AI. I play with it. I go out there and try to learn as much as possible when it comes to these things, because these are the topic of conversations in insider threat working groups or insider risk working groups. And, you know, when we get together in panels, or we get together in our own working groups within our colleagues, these are the topics that we talk about. And, you know, what's the lessons learned? What's the big things that are happening? What are the positive attributes? But what we need to do is take a step back and see what are our limiting factors, and what is AI not producing for us? Because it can't answer everything. AI is only as smart as what we make it right now. So in my opinion, you know, computers are only as smart as the person that made them. So until that they can sit there and they have opposable thumbs, and they can type their own keyboards, and they can make their own coffee and tell you what kind of creamer that they like in it, you know, we're at a point to where, you know, they have limiting factors. And I think that that's the important part of selling these off to our senior leaders to get those buy-in.
Thank you, Danny. I think, you know, I'm hearing, kind of connecting it together, hearing about the transparency with the workforce, with Frank's comments, and then here it's the transparency with your leadership to get that buy-in when you're making that sales pitch. And I think that's really important. We've talked in previous non-AI webinars about, you know, doing more with less, more and more data, more and more information that we have to synthesize and look at and find the needle in the needle stack in order to act on it. But being able to understand, this is what AI can do for us. Here's the potential for cost savings. Here's the potential for throwing more money at additional analysts or additional human resources. And that's not to say that we don't always want to keep that human in the loop, like we talked about January 9th during the previous webinar. But those are some ways I think in which you can tackle that and get that buy-in and support from leadership. Now, the next question, really, I'm going to ask both of you this, and Danny, will stay with you on this one to start. There are many that are fearful of both the power and the unknowns about AI. How do you tackle those misconceptions, those myths, and those stigmas surrounding the use of AI?
Well, I'm fortunate here at Georgia Tech, because, you know, one of the world's greatest technology schools. This is what a lot of the people around here are working on each and every day. You know, we have our schools and our students that are out here trying to produce the greatest artificial intelligence for whatever it is that they're trying to do. So our president for Georgia Tech has come out and actually, you know, wants to embrace the use of AI, and that message is out there. But the message is also out there from the president that, you know, that we have to understand the boundaries. Like I said before, we've got to understand what we can and can't do, what policies, you know, what can students use it for? You can't use it to write your dissertation. You can't use it to write your undergraduate, you know, thesis or things along those lines, because there's also AI out there that's going to identify when you do that, and you're going to get hit with plagiarism. So these are a lot of the pieces of the puzzle that we need to take into consideration and think about, but also just knowing that, you know, that it's out there, and going out there and touching it ourselves. That's one of the key factors for me, because I think that people that are fearful, you know, that it's too powerful, it can change photographs from, you know, make me look like that I'm 99 years old, and then also make me look like I'm 2 within a matter of a second. You know, those are very weird and you know, contentious points of contact for a lot of people. They don't really like it. But I do think that the more that we get out there and we utilize it and we understand what it does, then that's going to give us the ability to get those into our workflows of our insider risk programs, being able to manage our programs, and knowing that, you know, this is what our adversaries do. You know, that they're fearful. We're fearful of it because we don't understand it. So getting out there and learning what other people are already using it for gives us the ability to kind of reverse engineer that process, and then get a little bit more comfortable and know that, hey, we have an adversary that's using AI to attack and exploit my personnel for, through electronic communications, and they're doing it this way. They're using it in with translation corrections. So it's making it harder for our workforce to identify, the grammar inside of a suspicious email or a suspicious contact that, we would identify, or we would use those as red flags previously in our training and awareness. So having said all that, and we take all this information together, just knowing and understanding and playing with it, it's critical in order for us to be able to understand what the capabilities are and not be fearful of it at all.
Great. Thank you, Danny. Frank, any thoughts on that?
One of the things that strikes me about the question is the whole idea of fear. AI can be an extremely powerful tool to generate fear, just by the idea that we don't quite know what it's capable of. So we never quite know what we're looking at. We never quite know what we're reading. We're never quite sure what ground we stand on. If people can emulate through an email how I speak, if they can use my face off of this webinar, and my voice track, we're never quite sure who or what we're up against. And that goes, for insider risk programs, that goes to the core of trust in the organization, trust in your ability to do your job, trust in your ability that you will be trusted. And so those are just some sort of social and cultural opportunities that you can think through as leaders. What should you do about any of that? What can you do about any of that? I don't necessarily have any answers, except that these kinds of issues, whenever fear is involved, strong leadership is really, really important. Clarity is important. Transparency, like we've been talking about all along, including in the last session, is really, really important. Because if not, people think they're being fooled on top of being fooled. People don't like that.
Right. Great thoughts there. So final question here, and this actually very closely aligns with one of the questions we received in the chat as well. How can you use AI to find threats in an ever-increasing volume of data and information? And Frank, we'll keep it with you to start.
Sure. So one of the interesting aspects of this question to me is it's a how can, and I think there are certain kinds of problems that are not susceptible to how. There are certain problems that you can only choose a course according to a value orientation and then live with the results. So an easy one to think about is maybe I should have stayed with that company instead of this other company. Right. And so you look back at that decision and, you can look at all the data that you weighed, but you had to make a choice and you made a choice according to a value orientation. The data wasn't necessarily decisive because you're using a value orientation in order to interpret the meaning of the data. It's not just increasing volume of data, it's the quality of data, where we're getting the data, who's building the data, who's cleaning the data. And I know we're coming close to our time here. So there is an article that I'd suggest taking a look at. I found it helpful in thinking about the whole range of types of data and the different kinds of possibilities and challenges about data. It's called Deep Learning for Insider Threat Detection. And it's by two authors, Yuan, Y-U-A-N, and Wu, W-U. And it's in a journal called Computers and Security, May of 21. And maybe we can put that out at some point if people want to take a look. But I found that very helpful as an article for thinking through all the different things we can and can't do with the data. And a how can question presumes all of that other stuff is sort of solvable. All those questions about the data and whether and how value decisions go in to what you're making of the data, those things are rather clear. And I don't think they are in lots of cases.
Great, thank you. And thank you for sharing that resource too. Danny, any thoughts from your perspective on finding threats using AI with more and more data and volume, or data and information that you're receiving?
Yeah, I do. I have a different perspective than a lot of people when it comes to this is, and I think you said it best a while ago, John, when you was talking about the human centric aspects of the need for that in our insider risk management programs, because I don't think that AI is going to find my threats. We build our programs based on the risk appetite of our organizations, and those are going to be different from everywhere we go. So the artificial intelligence aspects of things are going to point me in directions that it's going to maybe identify indicators, or it's going to aggregate a bunch of different points of data in order to lead my analysts into a direction to further review. I say that to say that it can identify policy violations, but at the same time, it cannot, identify exemptions. So does an individual have an exemption, like take the USB policy? If you have one in your organization says no USBs, but then you do have this small group of researchers or people that in your organization that have an exemption for a USB. Well, AI doesn't know that. And so those are threats, but they're not really threats because they have an exemption and it's an approval to do those type of things. So I don't think that AI is going to identify or be able to point out and tell us exactly where our threats are. That's going to have to be us being able to process the information and being able to analyze the data that AI is going to produce for us by aggregating everything that it sees, everything that we tell it to go look at, endpoints, user activities, access rosters, whatever it is that we feed into it, that we want it to be able to aggregate and give us those risk assessment or risky points of contact. It's going to take us to be able to go out there as humans and being able to put that human touch on it and analyze it and identify what those threats are. And without that, we're just going to have a bunch of, if you don't have that human-centric touch on your program that's going to go out there and take a look at it, then we're going to end up with a bunch of, data that is going to say everybody is too risky and nobody's going to be able to send an email outside of, their organization at any point in time. So that's my point. Just a little soapbox there about the AI piece and the human-centric aspect. But I don't think that it can identify threats. I think that's our responsibility, and we need to make sure that we use the resources in those manners.
Yeah, I think that's important, looking at it from a perspective of identifying patterns, risk indicators, things that may be painting a picture of something being more significant than other lower level events. A lot of work's being done out there right now in modeling, creating risk models to make that determination using AI and machine learning to help support modeling, to help paint that picture. If you're dealing with thousands of unique actions and events, bringing those to the surface, which may be more cause for concern, and then being able to act on and address those. I know we just have 2 minutes left, but we do have 2 other questions in the chat. So if either of you have 30-second response, I'll give you an opportunity here. Any best practices in building 100% private large language models for insider threat and SOC teams? Anyone have, either of you have any response to that?
I am a non-technical program. I do leave a lot of this to my delegates in my information and cybersecurity department to build those learning models. And so, no, I don't personally have a best practice. I rely on the experts for that one, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm going to have to, unfortunately, it's Daniel. Daniel, sorry about that. I'm on the culture people side more than I am on the technical side. That is a great question, though, and an interesting idea. I apologize. I can't shed any light on it.
Another question: do we need a blockchain-like capability to establish trust?
I think that's another technical question there. I don't understand all the attributes of blockchain. I mean, I know what the basics are, but I mean, Off the top of my head, yes, but at the same time, I'm sure that somebody more technical than I would have a better explanation.
There's a related question to that as well. Is this zero trust for AI? So we can really look at them together hand in hand with respect to that particular question. I know there's a lot of work out there with encryption and public key infrastructure and things like that to be able to put in place zero trust type programs and functionality across really the security enterprise security domains that are out there. So I can't speak to building maybe a separate like capability just focused on blockchain or zero trust for AI and insider risk. Frank, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely worth exploring. I think in this kind of environment where things are as wide open as they are, absolutely worth exploring. I'm not on any kind of team where I could, provide any direct guidance though, or advice.
Okay. All right. Well, gentlemen, this has been another great discussion. I think I said last time that we could probably do a 10-part series just on AI. Great follow-up, very informative, and appreciate you two joining me today to have this chat, and definitely appreciate all of our participants who called in and watched today's webinar. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and that's all we have for you. So until next time, take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Frank.